Good to go whenever you want.
Hi, everybody. Hi. Thanks for coming. My name is Ed Swindelles. I'm from the University of Connecticut. I'm here to introduce your speakers and to serve as a moderator, I guess. So this is Mike Semaniuk from Palo Alto Networks, and he's going to be giving a presentation on hiding in plain sight, what's really happening in your networks. So we'll have about 20 minutes, and we'll get another speaker after that. Thank you.
How are you guys today? Hear me okay?
Yep.
So we're going to spend a little bit of time today talking about data that we gather off of real networks. Right? Try to keep that in place to keep me on. We'll take a look at some of the statistical data that we're able to gather. Should you have any questions or anything like that along the way, no need to wait to the end. Just raise a hand, blurt them out. If I'm yapping too much, throw paper at me. It's all perfectly fine. Right? I like to try to keep it light. If you ever need to track me down, I'm just Mike S at paloaltonetworks.com. So nice and easy there. Right? But when we do product evaluations as a company, we gather all sorts of interesting stats off of our appliances. And that's really the data that we're going to be looking at today. So the information that we're going to be reviewing is from over 2,200 unique organizations, where we found over 1,600 applications, 31 petabytes of data was analyzed in order to bring this all together. Tons of unique threats that were found out there, and billions of log entries that we evaluated. To try to give you an idea of the volume of data that is actually analyzed in order to be able to pull the statistical data out. 31 petabytes really equates to about 10 million 2-hour HD videos, right? So it's all of your students all watching Netflix all the time for an entire semester. Probably sounds like a regular school. That's neither here nor there. So it's all real information. It's not a survey or anything like that. How many of you remember when your networks used to look like this? Where everything was nice and easy. You had a firewall at the edge, I had my FTP servers, I had my mail servers. I knew when I allowed port 80, it was web browsing. When I allowed port 21, it was FTP. Our world has changed, and it's changed dramatically. How many of you, genuinely curious, how many of you are using Google Docs? I would venture to say all of you, in some way, shape, or form. Whether you know it or not, you're using it, right? So your data is really not within the confines of your networks anymore. It's really all outside. There's tons of sharing applications, as I like to look at them. All the social networking apps, the video apps, the email apps, things like that. And your business apps that you're running your school systems on are all outside the wall. So that data is out there. Who knows where, and we rely on those third parties to be able to maintain them. Right? There's really our enterprise apps. And kind of in the middle are these weird, goofy apps that we tend to think that are really primarily used by IT or may not exist on my network. And in reality, very unsophisticated users are using these types of applications. And oftentimes it allows people to circumvent the controls that you have on the network to not only protect the students, but to protect the data that you have as well. We'll mine into all of this a little bit more. So looking at the America side, we saw a tremendous amount of information here, and the vast majority of the threats that we see are delivered by those common sharing apps, right? Our web browsing, our social networking apps, and things along those lines. But it's overall, in the grand scheme, a very low amount of threat data that's actually delivered there. The threats tend to be over UDP ports, the vast majority of the time, right? And that's really where we get into it. 96% of the threats that we saw are all generated by a single botnet all over UDP, which is fascinating because what do we tend to think where the threats are? SMTP and web browsing. Right? We tend to focus on those areas when in reality we've got other applications that are really generating the vast majority of the threats. Now, how many of you have used SSL? Well, raise your hand back, right? Is SSL good or is SSL bad? Real question. What do you guys think?
Oh, good.
Good. How many people vote SSL is good? Right? How many think SSL is bad? Right? What does SSL do? It obfuscates, right? It encrypts, protects our data in transit. If we do that, so we protect our data when we go to Amazon, what do you think the bad guys do? Use SSL. Why do I want your intrusion prevention systems or your network analysis tools to be able to see what I'm doing? I'll encrypt it, right? So that black hole is actually getting larger and larger. And 32% of the total apps that we see out in the enterprise all use SSL, and that number is just skyrocketing, right? All of your Google searches all wrapped in SSL now. All of your Facebook activity wrapped in SSL. All of your Google Docs activity wrapped in SSL. So that visibility that you need in order to be able to protect the organization, protect the kids, it's getting harder and harder to do. So I mentioned the most common sharing applications, right? There's a lot of variance across different apps, right? We tend to think, oh, I've got YouTube for schools that I need to maintain. There's HTTP video, there's Vimeo, there's Brightcove, there's a virtual unlimited number of video-oriented apps that we see. And to give you an idea, you can see the numbers there to the top right. When we break it down based on the total number of organizations we looked at, we really need to have 25 or so variants of video delivery in our organization. Maybe not. Do we need 14 per organization IM apps? Maybe not. And they use a lot of bandwidth. Right? Bandwidth is cheap in the grand scheme of things. It's very much a commodity these days. But consumption of that, because virtually all of you raised your hands when it came to using Google Drive, right, and using Google Docs. Well, if I'm consuming all of my bandwidth for delivering video, how do I manage that? How do I make sure that the usage of Google Docs is still appropriate and functional within the organization? So it's interesting to see the competitive nature that comes into play there. And when we look at the threats, if we dig into those common sharing applications a little bit more, we see different types of threats that come in: code execution, brute force, things along those lines. And really, it's across those common applications that you'd expect to see them. Your web browsing, your mail applications, things along those lines. Right? Make sense so far? Or is it something else? I tend to be rather pessimistic, right? I see low numbers saying, and I think, well, are we really doing a good job, or are we missing something, right? Because looking at that, that's not a lot of threats. It's only 11% of the total that we saw. So we got to be doing something, right? But I like to use analogies when we can. So let's think of a home break-in. I got a bad guy. Busts in through the front door. Maybe he comes in through a side window. Whatever he does, you can think of that as malware delivery, right? Someone busting through one of those common apps that we expect to see. There's a second phase to any attack. When an exploit is run, there's a secondary payload that will be brought down. The initial exploit, that is because I got to get in. And then I got to get my code onto the client. That's really the second phase. There's plenty of seats. Come on in, guys. That is letting in the partners. Then there's moving around the network. How many of you guys have any sort of internal security? I guarantee you all have firewalls, IPSs, and things like that out at the edge, right? What do you have in the data center? I'd venture to say you might have some ACLs, or you're using VLANs to try to do internal segmentation. Realistically, VLANs are just a flat network. It's just isolation of broadcasts. That's all they're really doing for you, right? So really, once I get in, for the vast majority of educational networks, I've got free reign at this point, right? I've got credentials, and I'm poking around and I'm trying to find what I'm really interested in. I find the TV, I find the, oh, that built faster than I wanted, sorry. I find the TV, I find the jewelry shoved in a drawer in a bedroom, I find the SUV in the garage. And I need to exfiltrate that data, right? The SUV is not locked. Heck, I probably find the keys right in the house. I go right out the front door, no one's the wiser, right? It looks perfectly normal. It's all in plain sight. That's what happens with modern malware. right? And that's ultimately what's happening on your networks, right? You have, to use that, we have exploits that come in. Maybe they come in through an email application like POP3 or SMTP, or maybe my user's browsing a regular ordinary website, and there's a hidden iframe that delivers some sort of bad stuff to the user's workstation and takes advantage of a flaw, right? Because we all run IE and we all have it patched as quickly as humanly possible, right? No, we all know that's not reality, right? And the bad guys know that's not reality. Leads to exploits being run. Once I do that, I've got control, I perform a secondary download, and now I'm able to egress my content, right? Just because I see Twitter access on a network doesn't mean it's someone actually within a browser tweeting and doing what we expect them to be doing, right? Twitter, Facebook, web browsing, FTP can all be used to exfiltrate content from your networks. It's a scary proposition. In this case, SmokeLoader, the specific piece of malware that we're looking at, uses encryption. It's designed to steal passwords. So if you actually look at the kit that builds it, bad guys are able to say, I want FTP passwords out of these apps. I want to be able to scrape the registry, pull out NetBIOS keys to be able to break them and figure out the passwords. And it posts it all out by HTTP. Really sneaky, all right under your nose. Along the same lines, I mentioned earlier, the vast majority of threats that we see on real networks are all embedded in UDP. It's zero access is the big one, right? That's 96% of the threat activity that we've seen. Right? Zero access is a really nasty botnet in that it's virtually impossible to take down. It functions on using peer-to-peer. How many of you guys have dealt with peer-to-peer networking in your school systems, right? You all, and you're probably still dealing with it, but probably less than you have in the past, right? Peer-to-peer is obscenely resilient, and that's why this particular botnet is still out there as much as it is. And its real purpose in life is to get bitcoins, right? Because it's the currency of the underdog still, right? It's tons and tons of activity, and then you start to see the others that start to sprout up. But really, just plain UDP packets flowing on the network that ordinarily you're not even looking for are the most interesting packets that we wanted to analyze. Now, of the rest, the vast majority was contained within 10 particular applications. And it's mostly brute force. Looking at the different applications that we see here, where in your environments do you typically expect to see these? Where are your DNS servers? Where are your RDP servers? Where are your file sharing servers for SMB? Where are your SharePoint servers? Are they at the edge of your network? No. They're on the inside of the network. Right? The bad guys know that we don't want to just deface a website. I don't want to just be able to jump for joy and say, oh, look at me, I'm cool. I was able to crash an Apache web server and make it display the page I want it to display, right? That period of time in the network is gone. Now it's high-value targets. I want the social security numbers. I want the credit card numbers. Why? Because I can monetize them. I can make money from them. I can go, if I get track 1, track 2 data, for some reason, if you're an organization that accepts cards, let's say for tuition payments, if I could get track 1 and I could get track 2, every one of those is $15 to me on the bottom. So that's really what people are after. They might compromise a system that's not of particular interest because it allows for jumping around the internal network. How many of you manage your virtualized environments? You know, your VMwares, your Hyper-Vs, and all that type of stuff, right? Very rarely do you have security in between those systems. But very often you have very high-value systems that are there. So it's a scary place, right? We need to be able to make sure that you have protections in place there. I mentioned SSL before, right? SSL is good. But as with any coin, there's a flip side, right? Protects all of our stuff. What about the bad stuff? Right? Whether it be UltraSurf, Tor, botnet communication. If on your managed workstations, if you take one thing away from our time together today, on your managed workstations, look into performing SSL decryption. For those of you that are in the real higher ed, so my college people here, you're not going to do it for the students. It's virtually impossible to do. K through 12, where you've got managed Chromebooks and things along those lines, give serious consideration to SSL encryption. And it's manageable. It's not something that should be scary. If your devices are managed and you can push certificates to them, it's actually really, really easy to do if you have the appropriate networking technology to be able to make it happen. You will be amazed what additional information you'll find. So we'll play a little game, more good or bad. I actually don't like the name of the game. We'll have some fun. A few networking protocols. What do you think? Good? Bad? Pretty normal stuff, right? A few TCP ports. Which TCP port is missing? We'll see if we have any geeks in the room.
21.
21, excellent, excellent, nicely done. Yeah, port 21 is missing. It's quite intentional, by the way, right? Port 21, by the way, is the TCP port that FTP uses to establish its connection. What if I told you I saw all this stuff on your network between 10 and 5? Would that be eyebrow raising or no? Probably not, right? They're all pretty normal applications that you'd expect to see, right? They're also exactly what the Trojan POSRAM uses in order to function. This is Target, by the way. This is what they got hit with. This is what their NOC told them was there. They just did, they had so many alerts, they couldn't deal with it. They didn't have enough manpower to be able to accommodate it. What is all? Hiding in plain sight. Quite intentionally working only during business hours, which is kind of interesting, right? We tend to think that the bad guys are going to try to work, 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning when we're all sleeping, right? They tend to try to work during the day because your volume of information is much higher during the day and they can slide in with it. Right? Then again, SSL is it for protection or evasion. Lots and lots and lots of applications have the ability to be able to encrypt themselves. And the bad guys know it and the bad guys do it a lot. That's the one thing that we really need to think about is how to look within SSL. Right? All of our detective and preventative tools that we may be using, they work great when the traffic is in the clear. But as soon as someone puts the S in the protocol, whole other ball of wax of that. Right? But it's interesting to see, especially on the file sharing side, how many applications use SSL. And I'll venture to say, for those of you that have noticed a significant downtick in peer-to-peer networking issues on your network, I would venture to say that the problem simply moved to web sharing, right? Whether it be Dropbox, RapidShare, or things along those lines, right? Because it's open. We know it's there. No need to install a client. I can run it on anything. Right? So I went through very quickly. There's a whole bunch of different stats, and everything that's here is all publicly available. Right? If you go to www.paloaltonetwork/AUTR, application usage and threat report. Right? You're able to peruse all the data. You can filter it out to a specific industry, so we can look at just educational organizations. You can look at it just in Americas. You can look at it worldwide. Right? It's all visual. It's graphical. It's actually really, really slick to be able to look at. But you can mine and understand the data to get an understanding of what is actually out there, what are other organizations like mine seeing, and it'll give you an idea of what your network would look like. And if you ever wanted your clients on there, you can talk to the sales guys and all that. I'm not going to product pitch you. What do you think? I went really, really fast through that, because I thought I had a half an hour originally. Any questions, comments? All right. Well, thank you guys very much. I do appreciate the time. All right. And should you be interested, I'm over at our booth if you had any follow-up questions or anything like that. And we do have a couple of webinars that are coming, and we're more than happy to let you know what's happening there. Sir?
From an underfunded group, what would you recommend as far as just maybe a couple of simple steps to help, protect yourself? Like I just came across Snort, and I never heard about Snort before.
Mm-hmm.
Things like that. Do you have any sort of simple things that we could do to sit there and
Educate
maybe not
the
solve the
users.
problem, but help it live?
Educate, educate, educate. And when you see the notification that, hey, you should really update this application, don't hit remind me later. If there's two things that you can take away, keep up with patching. That's probably the most important thing, because we all have to do it anyway. Keep up with it. Microsoft has tools that are perfectly available to be able to push out patches to maintain your systems as quickly as possible. That's probably the most important thing. And second is education of the users. It's free. All it does is take time for us to create the materials to be able to educate the users. Do any of you have, more the answer's probably no, but any sort of security awareness posters or anything like that? You know what? Google it. You'll be shocked how many posters are already built. You can find them and just spend the money with the printing department. Heck, if you've got high schools, make it a project for them, right? I need 11 by 17 printouts, guys. Go make it happen, right? And put them up in the school. It will remind people that, you know what, just because I get an email that says that someone signed in with my Apple ID on an iPhone and click here to reset your password, yeah, you probably shouldn't click on that. It's a user education problem. Deals with the vast majority of it, right? And then there are free tools like Snort that are incredibly helpful. Snort can create haystacks of information, right? Sometimes if you deploy technology, even when it's free, you're going to generate more work. You're going to generate data overload. That's the risk that you ultimately end up on. And that's true for any technical solution that's out there. And this sounds corny, but talk to each other. Do you think the bad guys work solo or they work with each other? Right? Higher education is a wonderful opportunity to be able to network with each other. What are you doing? What are you doing? This is what I'm doing. How did you fix this problem? The bad guys do it. The good guys, we don't. We don't do it anywhere near enough to be sufficient. But educate the users, patch in a reasonable time frame, talk with your peers. Right? I guarantee you're having a problem. I'd venture to say 80% of the people in the room are either having the same problem or they've already solved it in some way, shape, or form. Right? But money does help. Truth be told. Right? Anything else, guys? I don't want to steal time from the next speaker. So, if you want to chat, I'll be over at the, what are they called? The booth. So, thank you, guys.
There might be time for more questions after the second speaker. The second speaker is Lee Barnes from iBoss. Lee here.
And actually, do you mind if I switch presentations on you, or do I have to go with this one?
That's fine. That's fine.
Can I hook up to?
Do you want to hook up?
Yeah, HDMI.
Maybe a VGA.
Your VGA.
That works too.
Or can you give me your presentation?
Do that as well.
You've got VGA.
Thanks. You're gonna hang me out to dry. I brought my bouncer.
I'm Anthony Bruno on the sales side, so I'll be silent on the sidelines. But Lee Barnes is one of our network engineer managers out of Fort Lauderdale, Florida. He's going to be doing a presentation on our FireSphere. It was a great presentation from Han on kind of just letting you guys know about the threats that are out there, especially the threats that are utilizing other ports, which definitely they're hopping port to port. What we're going to show you on is what do you guys do with the threats? And a lot of threats are getting through your typical firewall. They're getting through your AV. They're getting through, and they're silent on your network. And it just takes one trigger, and bam, you guys have an infection, and then possibly data exfiltration. What we're going to talk about is what iBoss is going to do to give you visibility and stopping those threats. And it's not by using signatures to try to catch bad guys. It's by monitoring your data. We're looking at the data in your network, which is what the bad guys and the infections are all after, which is stealing that data and exfiltrating it. So if you guys look at a lot of the breaches recently, Anthem, Home Depot, and these are big multi-million-dollar companies that have layered solutions after layered solution in their network, and they're still getting breached. Why is that? It's because the solutions that they have are trying to identify those malicious signatures, which they're never going to do 100% of. So what we're going to discuss today is how iBoss gives you guys that visibility to watch your data, to identify it, to trigger it, and set a baseline in your network to see Where's your data going? Is it peaking? Is it trying to communicate to a server in Russia? What's going on? So we're going to give you a nice high-level overview of that and kind of give you the tool to do that, which is through our FireSphere, which is just a security software key you guys can enable on your existing iBoss clients. So we like to keep a Q&A, but I think Lee will probably have enough time to run through the presentation and address any questions towards the end of the presentation. But I appreciate your time, and I'll pass things off to Lee.
Thanks. And to keep it more out of order, more chaotic, the underfunded school. Do you guys have iBox right now? No? Okay, well, that's a problem. But if you guys have iBox, what we can do is just put on a subscription key. It's not any extra hardware, and then we can do FireSphere with that. And I'll show you what FireSphere is. Okay, so a lot of the big breaches in the news lately, I don't need to read off all those records, but they lost a lot of data, a lot of PII, right? Stuff that you don't want leaving the network. And I think the problem is schools, the education market, doesn't realize how much PII you guys hold. You know, you guys have student social security numbers, you know, don't leave a student behind, whatever the bill was called. You guys have to track their progress, and they do so with their actual information, right? So what we want to do is protect that information because the attackers are after it. A lot of money goes along with that information. They're selling it off because kids don't have credit reports that are actually run on a day-to-day basis like a lot of adults do. So they're not alerted that somebody's stolen their information until they go and apply for colleges or they apply for credit cards when they turn 18. So they're able to use those credit cards or use their actual credit for years and years. So how did it go by without detection? We've got firewalls, we've got web content filters, we've got reporting on the network, we're looking at solar winds, we're looking at all kinds of stuff, but we're not seeing the data actually leave the network. So there's all the gateway protection, the different firewalls you guys might have. Some of you may be forward-thinking and looking at sandbox solutions like FireEye, Palo Alto. Intrusion detection and prevention, that's huge. You definitely need that. Endpoint protection, great. You got to get rid of viruses once they're on the network. What happens in that time that it gets in and you haven't detected it yet? It's exfiltrating data off your network. So you've got things like solar winds, you've got cacti, you're using polling intervals, maybe 5-minute intervals, and that's when the data is getting out. So maybe you get alerted 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes later after the data is already gone from your network. Great, we know that the data is gone, we can fix it now, but the data is gone, right? The attackers already have it. So there's a little window here. We call it the post-infection pre-detection, and that's what we're after. We're watching the data, or the cheese, as we like to say, right? We're not out there building a better mousetrap. We're looking at the cheese. Cheesy, I know. But you get the point. So we have the actual data exfiltration window, and that's the post-infection pre-detection. And what we're doing is we're using network anomaly monitoring. So that's a network baselining method. So we're taking an average of your actual bandwidth, and we're looking at that. As soon as there's a deviation, within whatever percentage that you guys derive, we'll alert you to that. We'll let you know that the network's deviating right now. And we're looking at the actual stream, right? We're looking at connections. We're not just polling. We're not looking at net flow data, which will alert you once the connection closes. We're looking at it in real time. We also have the data exfiltration containment module. I'll show you guys that as well. So this is the network traffic anomaly monitoring, or network baselining. For the tech folks, it's taking an average of the bytes, packets, and connections, TCP and UDP, inbound and outbound to the network. Okay? And what all that means is we're able to get a real baseline, or an average of what your network usually does. This was an actual customer. They didn't have the alerts turned on, so they weren't alerted to it, but they finally found malware within the network, and they were like, you know what, I wonder if iBoss, who's doing a demo or a POC right now, we had the appliance in there and they just wanted to monitor. They're like, I wonder if iBoss saw that. So they go back, they find the actual time frame of when they were infected and before that. So what they saw was the actual servers that were on this network were doing about 1 to 2 gigs a day, as you see there. And then all of a sudden there was a little drop in traffic where you see the small spike and then a drop, and then boom, data was being exfiltrated off their network. And then they detected that threat with their endpoint and got rid of it. So what we told them is, no problem. We could have set your network baseline threshold at about 5 gigs or 7 gigs or so. You would have been alerted right then and there, and that would have happened right before the actual huge spike. So you could have stopped the threat. So threats are in all places, right? Like Palo Alto is discussing, Google Drive, Dropbox, OneDrive. So we're looking at that data. We're doing SSL decryption, just like you said. You have to be doing SSL decryption these days. Not necessarily for Google, Bing, YouTube, those sorts of things, but you also have to decrypt things like Dropbox, Drive. You have to know what's going out there. So with the data exfiltration containment module, what you can actually do is set thresholds, right? So what you could say is, all right, Dropbox is good traffic. I don't want to block traffic there. Normally, I think everybody says, I want to block traffic to Russia, China, North Korea, all the bad destinations. But what if something's good and bad? So that's your Dropbox, your Google Drive. You can actually set thresholds. And you can say, well, you know, I think 100 megs of data to Dropbox every day is good. If we go over that, block the connection. And since we're watching it in real time, we can do that right away. So there's the contact information. Does anybody have any questions about how we do what we do?
If you talk about enabling something like fire stairs, you have to have an appliance on site to do that.
Not necessarily. You could use FireSphere through CEN if they ended up purchasing, but you would be, right, you would have to use their rules. Thank you.
So we have time now at the end for questions to either of our presenters. So I have a question. How many of you are from K through 12? That's what I thought, most of the room. So how much of your time or how much of your budgets do you get to spend worrying about types of threats that you guys are talking about, security, and everything that encompasses? And then on the converse of that, how much would you like to spend? You all recognize these threats because you're here, and where's that gap? Anybody want to jump in?
I would think it's somewhere less than 5% of our time we can spend doing this. And the problem that I see with all of this, we all probably live the same lives. We just don't have enough people to look at even all the logs. Even if we had the systems in place, we're running still half the time trying to just keep up. It's when it hits the fan, kind of moment is when we end up dealing with it. I'm always looking or trying to build a structure in place to make this happen. But, it's so tough to figure out. Like I bought a solution. I got a Palo Alto. Which are the better solution? Which is the one that I want to use? Which is going to not be great? Like I have a question on the Google Drive. Is if I'm, all of a sudden we're doing projects and you say 100 megs that day is good, but all of a sudden I got a teacher pushing video up, I have no idea, and all of a sudden the whole system stops going, and it's like, wow. How do those baselines work in a way that doesn't happen? Because I can't get calls of, oh, sorry, let me turn off our protection now, and you can put those files over, upload to YouTube or do something like that. So, again, it's the balance to us as well, making sure things are working and secure. It's tough. It's tough.
Absolutely, yeah, and the baselines are flexible. So if you know that projects are coming up, which I'm sure you're in tune with what all the teachers are doing, right? If you ever catch wind of something like that, though, you can go in and you can change that deviation percentage, right? Just modify it. Instead of having it at 25%, right? So the way it works is if you guys are normally doing 100 meg a day, you set it to 25%, all of a sudden you're doing 126 megs, boom, you're alerted. Well, maybe it's 50%, maybe it's 100%, maybe it's 1,000% that week. Just modify that.
Can you set it for, say, certain devices?
Correct,
Network,
yeah.
should
Protected
all of a sudden,
objects.
like our PowerSchool servers, all of a sudden sending tons of data out of our network.
Right,
We can do things like that.
exactly. And that might be where you want to focus on instead of the end users, is your servers, your high value assets. And to answer the other question is, we're not a firewall. So I don't think it's really which solution should I have, because I think it's both at the end of the day.
Yeah, frankly, you all have firewalls, in some way, shape, or form, right? Some are better than others.
think it's another question.
Yeah, what type of performance impact does running this have?
Little to none. It still runs at line rate, just like our web filtering module.
So there's something you brought up earlier that I thought was interesting about the fact that everybody's here as a community and talking to each other. I don't know the answer to this. Is there anything that exists either among this community or the CEN to kind of alert each other on emerging threats, or I'm seeing this type of activity? Anybody have any experience with something like that? Or I saw Mike in the room. Or if we can put Mike in the spot. Does CEN do anything like that?
I mean, we have our mailing list, if we know something's going on, we'll definitely throw it out to our mailing list, we'll throw it on our Facebook, Twitter, stuff like that, we're trying to get more, interaction with the community.
EduCause is another good resource. Right, always a lot of chatter going on there.
We have GMS, Government Communications Information Systems, listserv.
Crack has a great listserv that I joined recently, a lot of good questions go on there, a lot of good answers.
Do people typically use these different listservs for security-related things, or?
When they come up, yeah.
I can say that in the higher education space, out from UConn, we recently had a security incident, and it felt very isolated in the beginning, and then after talking to security professionals in other universities, like all over New England, people were experiencing the same type of incident. It was a characteristic that everybody had seen.
Thanks, I think the password.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, I think it's because you don't want to look like you have egg on your face. So you don't want to say something sometimes. And that's like banks and other organizations aren't talking as well as we all should be. And what you said, the bad guys are talking because they're finding the solutions on the back channels, and then nobody else wants to talk about it in front because no one wants to have a legal issue come up. Like, yeah, we might have had breach. And
You don't want to be on the front page of the Times, right? That's what it really comes down to, right? It's, I see organizations deal with it under the covers and take that monetary hit. I mean, that's a different conversation for you guys, right? But they will do that so that this way they don't take the brand impact of, 4 o'clock, right when the market closes on CNBC, there's company X, right? You don't want to be Home Depot, you don't want to be Anthem, right? They're very public, and it hurt them. It's funny seeing the TJ Maxx back, by the way, right? Because really, TJX was the first, right? TJX and BJ's, right? Those were the two big ones.
Part of the problem is these companies have a lot of money, and we don't have anywhere near the resources. I see something like that, and I think, how do I have a prayer with this small amount of money?
What's shocking is these guys all have tons of money, and what's happening? Same thing, right? It's we've all heard the punchline, right? What's Einstein's definition of insanity? It's doing the exact same thing over and over and over, expecting a different result, right? We build our networks the same way today that we did when Ethernet first came to be, right? We have access layers, core layers, distribution layers, and then we try to layer security into it, right? And you end up having Swiss cheese. There's still too many holes, you can't plug it, right? And it creates an economics problem, as you just said, right? There's a fundamental shift that I think needs to occur in how we design networks. Security needs to be built into the DNA of the network. Then you naturally have segmentation, visibility, control, and understanding just by redesigning the network. That's really, really hard to do when you have so much money already invested in legacy infrastructure, even though we know that legacy infrastructure isn't even under support anymore, but I can't get budget from the town to be able to replace it, right? So it's a very interesting dichotomy that we do live in. But I think if we shift our focus a little bit and say, why do I do it the same? Let me do it differently and see if my results are better. And I think they ultimately will be.
I have a
So
question.
I was on my soapbox.
How would your product deal with, say, like a crypto locker sort of malware program, where the user is actually the weakest link, and they're the ones either pulling it in via an email or a link in a website, and the damage is really hard to contain?
Yeah, there's a couple of ways. One, you got to find it, and you can't find it if you don't know the files are moving, right? So you need technology to be able to extract that content, analyze that content, and figure out what the F is it doing, right? And if it's bad, protect me from it, right? So we can do that on the networking side. But when you have a user that then takes their device home and gets something, that's a whole other ball of wax. So I need to get them back through my security solution. I've got stuff that can do that too, right? And then you ultimately have endpoint protection, right? Because we tend to look at what's in the news. Maybe it's a new iteration of crypto lockers. Like, oh my God, do I have protection for this? When in reality, that's one of 20 new variants that pop out every single day, right? So sandboxing is one way of protecting against it. But sandboxing is going to find that variant, deal with that variant, but tomorrow there's going to be a new variant, right? So you need to look at the endpoint. Ultimately, the endpoint is where you need to have that last layer of defense, right? It's, if it's encrypted and you're not decrypting on the network side, I'm not going to be able to see it there. Then it gets to the end user's workstation. And if you're relying on antivirus, I hate to break it to you, AV doesn't work, right? How many of you guys have had to clean up a workstation over the last month? Right? How many of you had to clean up 5 over the last month? Right? Is AV working for you or not? Right? So you need to rethink the endpoint protection side as well.
The encryption is it's the best and worst thing.
Absolutely. That's why I asked. Is it good or is it bad? You know?
Well, and that's, I mean, the EFF isn't out, I mean, EFF is supporting, encryption of all websites by the next year.
Absolutely.
Free SSL certificates.
Absolutely.
And then they're also promoting, ways around web filter because they know corporations and universities and others are decrypting their certificate, putting man in the middle, basically. It's going to be a tougher and tougher game to figure out and that's where it goes all the way back to what the Lenovo issue, where they were decrypting, they were basically running all the SSL traffic through that Snapfish or whatever the thing's called. It was badly designed. AV could cause more problems because they're doing the same thing to get to look at that data. So
there's no easy fix for any of this, right? Ultimately, it's when you look at the threat landscape, you need to make it more expensive for the bad guy to get it. Because ultimately, if you're harder to get, they're moving on because there's lower hanging fruit somewhere else. So you don't necessarily have to be 100% in how you're protecting. You need to increase your protection levels to the point where the bad guy says, you know what, I'm going to go after Sally instead because Sally doesn't do the same type of stuff. That's really what it is.
We had on that. We had an example. I don't know. A few weeks ago, there was a alert we got about Viking Dump, 2015, a big group that was going to hack all these state websites. They actually did hit the Connecticut site, but they mitigated it. It was about 15 minutes. So they went to New Hampshire, ended up hitting Maine, and Maine was, I don't know what happened, but they were totally unprotected. So they just started hitting them, and they really focused on them. And for 3 days straight, they brought down Maine.gov, just because the other states they were trying to attack, were pretty protected, and it was just like, let's go to the next one.
It's all low-hanging fruit.
Don't outswim the shark, just outswim your friend, right?
Right, exactly. That's a great way of putting it. That's exactly right.
Yeah, and that's why it's really important to have a layered approach as well, right? AV isn't doing it, it's just looking at signatures. You flip a couple of bits, it's a new signature now. Now they have to keep up with that. They have to sandbox it, they have to reverse engineer it, figure out what it's doing, and create a new signature for it. So that's why you really do need a layered approach, right? AV, you need it. You need it for all the signatures that they already have. But that's why you need to look at it from a higher level. Look at it from the network standpoint, right? Do network malware scanning, do data exfiltration, do network baselining. Once you have all those things layered with your already firewall and web content filter, you're protected. But now we're back to the issue at hand, money, right? It's going to cost a lot.
It feels like it almost feels like we're kicking AV when they're down, which we are, right?
Yeah.
But let's call it what it is, right? How many of you guys are spending money on AV? Right? Right. So if you're spending money on Semaniuk, McAfee, Kaspersky, you name it, stop. This sounds strange, but stop. Get Microsoft Security Essentials. Free, and you can manage it. Take that budget, allocate it to other solutions that actually do something for you. He's absolutely right. You still need AV, but you can reallocate the funds to try to do something better.
And the biggest thing, I don't know how many, the biggest thing we've ever done, always done, is never letting a computer run an administrative mode as a user.
Yep.
I took over the town. Every computer was administrative. Everyone had administrative rights to the computer. I was like, what? Yeah. But they didn't have anybody to manage it, so they would say, well, we just need to install our own stuff. I said, no, you're going to call us when you install something. And that is taken, and that's why, the worst thing that happens mostly is a profile gets infected, and you delete the profile,
Yeah.
rebuild it, and then you go. I think
Who's
that's
the gentleman who
biggest-
asked for
I want
something
to
that was
comment on
inexpensive?
that. If I could comment
That's
on
insanely
that,
helpful.
if anybody's really intimidated by, you have administrative users and you're intimidated because you want them hashed up right away, just educate yourself on software deployment. If it's group policy,
Yeah.
or you purchase something like PDQ,
Yeah.
it gets done in an instant. If somebody's on site, it's really easy to pick up and it's done.
You gotta have both those tools, like we do, we use FileWave and other tools to push out apps, and if you don't have that, you have
Guess
that.
what? No malware anymore.
Yeah.
Right. Administrative, processes running at a level of privilege that are far above and beyond what the user actually needs is a welcoming that to bring the bad shit in. Sorry for the language, but I like to think of them amongst friends.
Yeah, just be careful about when you turn off administrative access to your users, because we did it from the XP to the Windows 7 conversion, and because everybody thinks they know technology, we had about 5 to 10% of our users that were really pissed off,
Yep.
saying, why can't I do this? And you gotta come here and just add a new printer to my thing, or you gotta do this and stuff. And
That's the line I ever got.
tough luck,
Someone
but the
said
point
it-
being is, it's the politics of the situation that can come back to bite you. Even though you're doing the right thing and everything's perfect, you get the politics of the whiners that think they know technology more than IT knows technology, and that can really screw you. So you gotta be aware of that and be very careful about
The
that.
best line I ever was given on that is then, okay, if you know how to do it, when we have a problem that stems from your machine, you're gonna fix it, and you're gonna come and stay with us overnight and make sure everything's fixed. Do you wanna do that? Probably not.
It's a good response.
It's just that obvious. It's,
I like that.
you know, this isn't your personal computer.
That was very hard to get them out of the thought patterns of that. It's my computer, it's been here for 3 years, and I'm gonna do what I want with it.
There's a question.
Yeah, so, it's maybe more, the FireSphere, does that handle the managed SSL decryption? Does it handle that? Or-
We handle it with the web filtering module.
And that's only for, I'm gonna change gears here, but that's only for systems on your network. Does it have operating protection for things that you can't manage, like BYOD?
Sure, you can do SSL decryption on BYOD.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, you just have to push out a root cert to them, which usually isn't the easiest thing to do. So we allow you to actually push out a portal. So as soon as they go to a decrypted site, let's say it's google.com, they get that pop-up that says, here's how you install the certificate. We also look at user agents, so depending on the browser they use, they get customized instructions on how to install it. If they don't install it, they don't have to. They can go to the site and see the browser warning, and they're still decrypted. So your end goal is still achieved. It just might be bad end user training now to let them go through those
Right.
warnings.
Which they all do anyway.